why did it take multiple suicides to finally come out and about? How many is it going to take?
Hi, I'm Dr. Natalie Marr, and this is Jennifer Zenz-Olson, and we are Women of Wellness. This is the parent interview portion of our series on teen suicide, a call to connection. And Janet is one of those parents that you just met there. And she has the question that basically started this whole series.
Yeah, how many people is it going to take? And, when are we going to decide to do something about this?
Right. So that's what spurred Jen and I to even want to start talking about this, much less do this entire series. So, and next up, you're also going to meet Rob and Sam as well. And so those three parents are who chose to be participants in our parent interview series. And we're just going to introduce you with their own personal stories about what their personal experience is with suicide.
I unfortunately have a lot of experience with suicide. Unfortunately, probably about 3 years ago, I lost a really good coworker who was like a sister to me to suicide. And the toughest part is that I never in a million years would have ever guessed it, that she was struggling. I worked with her every single day. She was getting married in 6 weeks. It was just beyond shocking, that she didn't show up to work one day. That was my first experience. My second experience was just this last school year. 2 of my 3 kids went to Blaine High School. And it was the first day of school where one boy died of suicide on the very first day of school. I didn't know who he was personally, but my son did. Seemed to know him pretty well. Probably about 2 weeks later, his good buddy that I'd known since he was like 3 years old died to suicide. Lovely family, just amazing kid, amazing family. Like, it was mind-boggling to even think about, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how you're doing life right now. And then my son in January.
I did remember I had a situation where what I think was important is I did have teachers and others that were listening, at least when they heard some things, they reached out. There was a time I remember, and Sam had a similar experience. I remember when I was in 8th grade, I said something about hurting myself. I was in a bad place. I almost remember the day that it happened or what happened. And the reaction I got from teachers and the community around was one of concern, and I felt embarrassed because I may not have meant that. I may not have meant, but that was what I learned about the power of talking through some things. To be able to know that somebody was listening really was the thing that made me go, wow, that's what I learned. But as far as how to deal with it and how to deal with the emotions, I never had that connection. And I don't know if schools and others, if anybody else has had experience it. I had to go through that to learn that maybe, but I never had it at a point that could be communicated broadly, and I never had those tools at my disposal, I guess, when I was a kid.
Rob, can you elaborate on when you talked about it, who you told, and how there were people that heard of it and then showed concern towards you?
Yeah, it was, I remember it was at my locker, and I kind of said it in a way that people could hear around me, my locker mate or somebody next to me. I remember it then got to my sister who was in the same school, and then it bubbled into teachers and counselors. So what I'm appreciative of that whole experience was the person who heard it and said something, even though I was embarrassed about. I wasn't embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I created such a. And I guess that's the learning, is that people are gonna, if they talk about it, they are gonna feel embarrassed. They are gonna feel something that, and maybe that's the reason why. Maybe I did it to try to get some attention, try to get somebody to talk to. But that's how it happened.
The rest of my experience just comes from, you know, working with kids for almost 20 years and being a mandated reporter and, you know, having to follow up on things with the kids and with parents and things of that nature. I did have a child in elementary school setting make a comment to one of the staff. So, of course, we had to follow up, talk to the student, you know, did he have any actual plans to do this? How did he think he was going to do it? You know, following up with the parents and the principal. And, you know, obviously he backtracked then, said he didn't mean it and he was just mad, and probably a similar situation that Rob was in, but I think at a younger age.
Okay.
So we're, like I said, we were taught no matter how little that you think, how serious you think it might not be, that the kid is just venting or whatever, but you always have to follow up.
I'd like to add something in there too,
Yeah.
if I could. You know, one of the first kids I ever worked with when I became a counselor after teaching English for a long time. Anyway, this kid came into my office in March of my first year at the middle school. Now he was a ninth grader, junior high. And he said, you know what, I've been thinking about it. I think I'm going to commit suicide. I mean, just out of the blue, you know. I'd never dealt with it before, you know. But I said, well, I have to call your mom and talk to her about it. And I called her and she says, oh my God, is he talking about that again? He's not serious about it. You know, and that was in March, and he committed suicide in July.
Oh, Lord.
You know, I mean, so you just have, I guess my message is you have to listen to your kids.
Yeah.
When they're telling you big stuff and little stuff. That was obviously a big thing she didn't listen to, but you know, that's my message to parents.
So there we got to listen to everyone's personal stories and journeys and how they ended up here. And we sort of wrap up with both Sam and Keith talking about the importance of addressing any single comment, gesture, anything where a student or child is concerned. If there's any suicidal ideation, we need to address that as seriously every single time. And then Keith is a retired school counselor. You guys have met him in past videos here. His story around the time that he dealt with a case where a family really kind of dismissed something and then that child ended up taking their lives. And just a really, truly tragic story. But again, highlighting the importance of taking it seriously every single time. And so next up, we're going to be talking about the different layers of education experience they had, and then was that helpful or not?
Yeah.
I can just remember having brief classes, not even classes, but like short little, like, I don't even know what you'd call it, seminars where they'd come and have someone talk to us. And this is more elementary school, I feel.
Okay.
They said people who are suicidal, they might start giving things away, or they might start, you know, trying to make amends with people. And they just told us about these little warning signs. And if we saw these warning signs, that was something that we should be in tune to, and then go, you know, tell an adult or whatever.
I didn't know anything about it. Like, I went to a small school in North St. Paul, and so we just, it was never even talked about at all. So nothing. Because I have someone else, you know, that I work with that said the same thing, like, oh my gosh, like, I had someone back in the day, and they're even older than me, and that said, I remember there was one death in the school to suicide, and they had this big speaker come out, and she goes, I will never forget that speech.
So that's a very short and sweet section, because there is very little that our parent panel had to say about any information that they received when they were younger, to be educated on suicide, on anything relevant to that. What I liked, though, about what Janet says right at the end there is it is those unique experiences, right? It is those unique connections that people have that just stay with them the rest of their life. So that wasn't a formal education. It was a horrible experience, but this individual that was a friend of Janet's will never forget what she learned listening to
a speaker
on
right
it.
and again and I think that gets at that whole idea of the connectability, that it's when someone becomes connectable, when somebody shares a story, when someone becomes vulnerable, which we're going to talk about ad nauseum. It's really what's laying the groundwork for us to keep discussing this and having a almost visceral experience that stays with us. And that's really, I think, going to be one of the goals of all of this that we're doing, is how to create visceral experiences for people that they can take away and have something really stay with them, right? To teach a lesson, to have an experience. And it was really well stated there in terms of what her colleague took away from that experience, which is amazing. So next up, we will be talking about the other disconnects that happen in terms of teen suicide.
I think there's also a stigma attached to mental health. I mean, I like to talk about mental health. And they'll talk about cancer, and they'll talk about having heart problems and all these other things. But when it comes to mental health, it's like back off.
I've done therapy now for the last couple of years, and it's before there's no way, but then I talk to people. I used to just because job situations and other things, and you go through a bunch of things, and then you start to hear, and they're dealing with the same thing, and they do this. And what I realized though is that still is not the norm.
No,
it's the exception. There isn't enough just general conversations of other things. So I think that whole stigma piece. I think we've made a lot of inroads, but it's clear it's not nearly
exactly
it needs to be. I mean, it's great when people are open on Twitter now about their mental health, or a celebrity is more active than maybe they would have been, or they're creating songs or doing things that get people to make it, maybe it's not that bad, but we still have a long ways to go.
You have to talk about it. I always talk about we have to break the no talk rule.
Absolutely.
Because our culture kind of says we shouldn't talk about it. You know, and I used to say all the time, it's like, well, okay, we shouldn't talk about teen pregnancy or, alcohol use by teens. But we do those things,
right.
This isn't any different.
So what we listened to here was Sam and Rob and even Keith talking about the different layers of stigma. And as we've proceeded, that's one of those themes that keeps coming up over and over again. It's just the stigma that's still attached to mental health services. And I love where Rob addresses going to therapy, but was really kind of prompted by, again, hearing his stories from friends. Like, I think it was important that he took away information and then decided to get his own therapy. But by hearing someone else, that vulnerability and that connection that he had helped him kind of go to therapy for the first time, which was really powerful for him. And I love that Keith kind of just wraps up things with that idea of breaking that no talk rule, which I just think is so crucial. That idea that talking about it somehow it's catchy, right? This idea, this theory that it's not polio, friends. It's we have this idea that I think it's still, it's taboo to talk about it. And I love that concept of breaking that no talk rule and making it accessible to all of us to have these conversations.
Yeah, and Rob also points out that we have a long way to go.
We still have a long way to go.
So this is why we over and over in these videos, even though there's lots of barriers and lots of disconnects, want to just bring out stigma.
Stigma's
a big one.
It is. It is. And so following up, we're going to just listen to some more disconnects here then.
I have a family that probably their openness, there's a different cultural gap in ages now. My family, where I grew up, there wasn't a lot of overly communicative people. Things in, and we actually my parents, I think, taught openness, and we were able to do that. But if you look at, they were finding all these things that happened when they were kids and other things that are happening. So there is a culture of being too stoic that I think it's interesting. I think in some ways where kids are dealing with the hardest things in the world, but they also now have the most ability to communicate and talk and work through that thing than my parents. They never said anything. It was all about stoic.
Yeah.
They never communicated anything bad that happened. The kids now, the pressure and it was a lot about the pressure she put on herself.
Yes.
We were very nervous about that with Gabby. They are I don't know, there's a drive that's there right now, and some of these kids are putting, and obviously there's different scenarios, but the scenario that kind of related was they're putting so much pressure on themselves, and if they can't meet their own standards, they're internalizing that in not very healthy ways. It actually goes along with this issue of not talking. I'm a board member of a children's theater here in Ramsey, up in Ramsey, just next to Anoka there, and they did a social interest troupe where that some of the actors would actually do an education series, and one of the plays they did was on bullying and as well as teen suicide. And the mechanism that they were using is that we brought in counselors and other groups, and then people who have dealt with it as a way to teach these kids as they're putting on their performances. So trying to connect in different ways. And I think the insight is one is you got to seek out. I didn't even know some of these groups existed, and they were able to find these groups who dealt with it, and they brought these counselors in to talk to the kids and others. The other thing, though, which I think is a bit disheartening, is they tried to actually go to the schools and put on these performances, go to the high schools and the others, and the high schools were like, that's over, that's too much for us.
Yep.
And they wouldn't take it on as much. We were able to go up to Monticello, I think they put it on, and some schools, but it was hard to get in. There's another one that they got into another deep topic. The point is one is there are resources, and two is the ability to activate on those resources seems like something that we could activate by connecting people who had these experiences. And that's what I thought was really powerful. So
I really think that the viewpoint is that it's going to be sensationalized.
Yeah.
The more you talk about it. And
Right.
you know us, we're a theater family, go to a lot of shows. We went to a show called Dear Evan Hansen. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of that. But the plot of this very famous musical, it's on Broadway and it's kind of touring around the country now. But the plot of it is about a student who commits suicide and everything that happens after he commits suicide. And the underlying message there's a song called You Are Not Alone. And the underlying message was, if you're feeling this way, to talk about it, to let people know about it. But I could see where people could kind of spin that and think that, oh, he's getting all this attention now after he's died. How cool is that everybody's talking about him now? And you know what I mean?
I totally do. Yeah, I think
I understand where that fear comes from.
So there's a few concepts that came up during this stretch of the video. And so one of the ones that I want to just talk to is this idea that families really kind of put us in a bind at times. The we don't talk about problems, or we don't have problems if we don't talk about problems thing that Rob speaks to is definitely a theme that's come up across the videos, and definitely something that in practice that both Jen and I have seen. If families don't make it okay to talk about this stuff, it won't get talked about.
Right, and we don't want to assume it's just a school thing either, right?
No.
So you're going to hear two themes as we get towards the end of our series, that it's so important that these different legs, so to speak, of this chair we're trying to build of stability, it's got to happen on the home front as well. And so despite the fact that we live in the Midwest, and we've got lots of stoicism out here, there's a lot of Norwegian, whatever, we have a tendency, I think, to kind of stay quiet about things, but the importance that we're able to have those conversations at home and in school and every facet of our life, that it's going to be just as essential to be able to have those conversations.
Exactly. And Rob also mentions here, teens have a lot of pressure on themselves and start to internalize that in very unhealthy ways. And it is important to recognize that they have hard lives too. You might think that going to high school isn't all that hard, But I know that Jen has said through this series, like there's a lot that they walk into those high schools, and there's a lot that's on their shoulders.
Yeah.
So I think that's also a real big disconnect area that we want to just keep in our minds.
Yeah. And again, that myth that they might look fine, right? That sometimes these kids that we have no idea, their lives can look really put together and great. And I know some of our teens mention that, but that sometimes we can take for granted that means that everything's okay on the inside. Right. And so we just don't ever want to miss that opportunity to be talking, to understand how they're internalizing some of those experiences.
Exactly.
And then I love, one of the things that really fires me up is Rob sharing that story about the theater. And they have this beautiful opportunity to do this sort of social, current, situational theme and couldn't get it into the schools.
Yeah.
And so even though they offered this free service to come in and be talking about this, we still have that fear, that scared notion that, again, even when Sam is talking about the theater production they went to see, and she says, I think I can see how some people might twist that into being sensationalized. It's not sensationalizing it, it's calling attention to, it's bringing awareness, if you will, to a subject. And I think we're still really reluctant about that. So you see that when they're offering is this beautiful program to go in and be prompting conversation, and schools were like, I don't want to have anything to do with that.
Right. Such a missed opportunity.
It's total missed opportunity. And so again, what resources are out there that we might be able to utilize that might not even cost something to a school system or a school district or a city or community, whatever. We have things we can be utilizing, and are we aware of those things and utilizing them to the best of their capacity? And I hate to hear about missed resources, particularly that are free of charge and don't cost anyone anything, right? But we have to be able to recognize that there's still that fear and that stigma and idea that we're going to sensationalize, or it's somehow going to promote suicide if we talk about it. Exactly. And so up next is going to be some more barriers here that we're going to discuss, and we'll see what they have to say.
You have the largest school district in the state, as far as I know. And just having personal experience and working in the district, it's so culturally and economically diverse in itself. Like in my 17 years there, I worked at every single Anoka elementary school, and the dynamics of every Anoka school is so different, even just from Lincoln to Franklin, and they're like maybe a mile, if that, apart.
Right.
The dynamics of that were so different. So what would work at one school may not work at another school, and the way the principals run things is so different. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with it too. Like,
so different districts, they handle it so different. Like, she died, and then they did this big candlelight vigil outside their school, like a walk around the school. It's just what the heck, these kids are needing something, they're grieving the loss of their friend. And
so we stopped it here because we think that this idea of culture of schools being a barrier is a pretty unique one, that what works for one school doesn't work for another. I think we're even going to continue to see this in the series when you watch our community panel talk to what they did in their own community. It doesn't always translate from school to school.
Right.
The other piece here is the school district that all of this happened in is huge.
It's the biggest school district in our state.
Huge, right. So if you create policy and procedure for a district of that size, and you have black and white answers to this can happen, this can't happen, this can happen, this can't happen, then what happens is that doesn't translate really well when something like a suicide occurs,
because it creates a disconnect.
It creates
so whenever we say it's a one size fits all black and white answer, you're stealing all the creativity and all the value in each cultural subset of a school. And I love that Sam outlines every single school I went to, and she was in every one, was different, and the principal was different, the way they managed things was different. So giving that credence and allowing that creativity is just a huge piece of, I think,
and that's what Janet points out, right? Is that in a different school, they were able to do this a little bit differently, and it allowed space for these kids to grieve the loss of a friend.
Right. Exactly. It was beautifully said.
So we wanted to just kind of talk about that specifically, but let's go ahead and look at some other barriers as well.
you can't get in. Like you have to like fill out the intakes and then, okay, well, we'll see in about 2 months. Possible financial barriers. I don't know. Some people don't have insurance, or that's another thing is a financial barrier too, because therapy, our mental health is not cheap.
I think that totally think the technology and some of the stuff are barriers. I'm luckily in that space, so I'm hopefully ahead of it a little bit more. But
Yeah.
It's a barrier, and the barrier that the world is TikTok, or the world is everybody's dancing and singing, and they see that all the time, and they're like, no, that's not reality. So how do you overcome that? That to me is, that's not easy. Yeah. I'm, and my background, I've worked at a digital innovation company, and it was all about how to use, I couldn't agree more. I think there's a lot of negatives, but it's how do you activate? The examples that I think about is like frictionless ways in for people to easily get access to the information. If they're 3 a.m, they just woke up and they remembered that there's a text that you can send a text to hear from a friend or to ask a question, no matter what time it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you think about how do you activate a network of people who are dealing with similar issues, and everybody who signs up for that network will get a ping if they get that text. So some type of network of peers or other groups that are within there that allow you to do that. And I know there are some, like, I think there are similar apps. If you're hungry, you can text this number and somebody will help you get food in a way that you need. Or if you're homeless, I know there's a homeless app for kids who are dealing with they're in a bad situation or a situation.
Yeah.
It's like creating those and then activating them and really investing in getting the schools to promote, getting them to recognize it's a safe way in. There's no commitment, but also, using tools like TikTok and others.
When I was working back in the schools, I had a lot of inner conflict of how do I be an authority figure to this kid, but at the same time, well, I have to give them their autonomy and they need to be able to choose what they want to do and yada, yada, yada. Like, she's still a child. She's still my child. And she doesn't have the life experience to make some of these bigger choices in her life. And maybe that's because she is an only child and I'm being overprotective, but at the same time, there's like a lot going on in this world that she doesn't. I feel like I need to protect her from that.
What I really appreciate here that Rob talks about is that duality of technology. So he talks about both the barrier of it, but also almost a resource within it, and needing to kind of address teens where they are, which is very much immersed in technology. But that idea of technology being an area that's creating sort of this sense of unreality for our kids. And I think that's very true because it's so one-dimensional. And so I get concerned for our kids today that they're being exposed to a lot of material that's really surfacey. It's only one aspect of the story, And so it would be easy for them to fall into that place where they only ever see this really beautiful life, the finest points of it, or the most beautiful images. So I think that can be it can be a huge barrier for kids. But I also love the idea that he mentions, using TikTok and using those resources in the same way to reach out to kids, to join with them where they are. This is where they spend their time. They want to be entertained. I asked one of my kiddos that I know from yoga and coaching and things like that, I asked her about what she would like, and she said, I would absolutely follow a TikTok that was about mental health awareness, and particularly if it was short and sweet and entertaining. That is exactly from the mouth of a teenager who was in the thick of this. And I'm like, that's exactly where we're going here, and that is what we need to do. So it isn't a perfect answer. I do think we want to address the barrier piece of it and be aware that our kids are facing that and be able to talk about that. Right. So we can call awareness to that, but still continuing to use that technology where the kids are to benefit them as well, and continue to grow awareness and create stories so that it's normalizing mental health, right? Struggles, and we make a space for that to be a real thing,
right? To kick back so that we can be getting at that stigma piece, at least on their level. This might be one of those opportunities. The other piece, that I think it was really unique in here was Sam sharing what I know to be a struggle as a parent of a teen, and I'm sure you would say the same. And I've worked with lots of parents and in trying to help parent coach. There's this, this walk that we're doing developmentally as our kids are individuating from us about how much autonomy do you give them and how much do you rein that in, and what things do you rein in and how. And I think one of the reasons why I thought it was so beautiful in our adult group, the adults that struggled with suicide as teens, they said this needs to start early. That's why, honestly, I think if the communication and the language is already there in a family system, makes a big difference for you as a parent at that stage to know where is autonomy and where is it not? Where do I step in and where do I not? But it is a struggle, and it's an interesting barrier to have posed.
It's parenting teens 101. I mean, I think every single parent of a teen would sit down and say this same thing, this constant walking a line with your kids and wanting to encourage independence. But she's exactly right that your kids don't have the wisdom yet, right? So I'm gonna go back to our teen video and cite Nicole, who says, look, we're 15, 16, 17, 18. We don't know what we're doing here. Bless her. We don't know what to do with this stuff. That's exactly what Sam is indicating here, which is our kids are in this place of trying to grow into adulthood and practice and deal with some independence, but they don't yet have the wisdom we have. So it still becomes our job to sit with them in this and duke that out, and it is a constant struggle. I don't think that's abnormal in any way, but I love that it's brought up here because I think that that's a real facet of parenting teens in this day and age. Absolutely.
And this is why we wanted to do a panel with all these different groups, because everyone has kind of its own
a little different
spin. Same topics, and same genres of things that we've seen, but still it's unique. That's unique to the parenting.
It is absolutely. So it was a beautiful, I think, connection of some barriers that are going on there and the way that they outline them. I really appreciate that. And next up, we're going to talk a little bit about some myths.
There's no one to blame. There's no one to blame. I would never do anything like this, ever.
I think it was 60 Minutes where a girl who is, I think, a junior in high school, we watched it with Gabby. I think junior or senior in high school, and she committed suicide. And she was a straight A student, had every single thing going for her. And the parents were like, they had no idea. And then they started to look after she had committed suicide. They looked in her books, her diaries, and how she felt about herself was, they could not believe it, knowing even the day before what they've done. And maybe I'll forward I can't remember their name. They are actually actively going around the communities and speaking. They are completely leaning in to, we have to put a face to this, that there really isn't a model. There isn't this idea that you can see it is not even remotely true. And this is about frequency and talking about it. These people are actively talking about it, and they're doing it to show a different face. So it resonated with me, and I was like, I need to show that to my doctor, because this isn't just somebody, this is a different kind of person, and I'm seeing signs that you're very hard on yourself. You're trying to do too much. You're expecting more of you than you need to. So anyway, it's just another potential resource.
a really interesting segment, honestly. I mean, it speaks to the big myth that we would know what it looks like in a teen if they were suicidal,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
The series that Rob is speaking about, it's brilliant. I mean, what these parents are now doing, because she had everything going for her. It never looked like that. And this is how Janet started that segment, is, you know, he told her that it would never
He would never do that. Right. Yeah.
And yet
exactly.
it did occur. And so
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things we could put in our toolbox for you guys at the end of this series is, don't think you're going to know what this looks like.
Exactly.
Because you won't, because it's different for every single individual that experiences depression, you know, anxiousness, any of the things that can lead into suicidal thinking and suicidal behaviors.
Yeah, it definitely does not look like one thing, and I think that's just a resounding message that I think we're still maybe holding on to as a culture, like this idea. And so I love that
we like boxes.
We do.
Like to put
it makes us
things
feel
into
better.
boxes. And it's just not going to happen, especially
Exactly.
with this. It's just not going to happen.
It's not, absolutely. So no, that was a really, really well said.
Yes,
you know, opportunity to talk about that myth. So, all right. So next up, we're going to be talking about recommendations on things that might be more helpful that our panel wanted to share. Yeah.
Just that any little comment needs to be taken seriously, because God forbid the one time you don't take it seriously is the time that, you know, something awful would happen.
Saying something about the signs to look for, that type of a thing. And I'm like, that's exactly what I want. Like, this needs to be talked about. That's what I'm pushing for, that we can't just be hush hush about this. You know, what's going on. My house is always open to you. We'll talk to you. And I'm not your parent. So I'm like, sometimes it's easier to talk to someone that's not a parent and not non-judging and has advice. I've gone through this. I know your feelings. Always open. I guess my biggest thing is, like we've talked 562 times about it, is just talking, keeping it open forum about it. Let's talk about it. You know, one of the things I would love to see in schools is, especially after, you know, a lot of the recent suicides, is like grief groups or something like that for the kids. I think would be helpful. I am not trained to do anything like that, but I'm like, I would be willing to help out in any way, shape, or form, you know, getting something started. Whereas they can just have an open forum to just be able to talk about it and what their feelings, and not being so hush hush about it and keeping it quiet, not letting the kids, like, not letting them grieve, you know. They lost a lot of their friends this year and it sucks, you know, it sucks. And I'm like, I can't even fathom being 15, 16, 17, 18 years old and losing the amount of people they've lost in such a short period of time. Like, I can't, like, it's hard for me as an adult to grasp that. And let alone, these are kids that see each other every single day. Or it's like even kids that even weren't at Blaine High School, but that were in, you know, at Oakview, at Coon Rapids High School, Coon Rapids Middle School. They're all intertwined on social media. Knowing what resources there are out there, that the kids or people in general can utilize.
Frequency of education.
Absolutely.
It's not just the 1 month, and it's not, and I do think participation in the community of asking, because all of us have been through some type of experience. Obviously, the extremes of this is just, it's there, but think of all the teachers at that school, at other schools, have been through similar experiences. And if they had a vehicle to be able to express that, there's a lot of teachers who, I know somebody that, Gabby, my daughter, was, she had a teacher in middle school that daughter committed suicide. And he talked about it pretty openly.
First day of school, first class they had with him, he scrolled through some of the pictures on his laptop and put them on the screen, and his 2 daughters were up there, and he proceeded to explain to them that his older one had committed suicide, I don't know, the year before, and if they had any struggles or if they felt anything, that he was always going to be open to them, and they could talk to him. he was going to be there. And she came home and told us about it that very day. I think it had a big impact on her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like small moments that can activate that discussion to bring empathy.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's
That doesn't have to be a
no.
class. That doesn't have to be
Right.
but you do have to allow for that and give vehicles to that. It could be as big or as small as there, but
One of the things that really resonates for me is where Janet talks about having an open door in her house and how she wants the kids around her to know that she's a safe adult. And so one of the things in this last year that I started really doing when we had so many suicides was being very clear with my daughter's friends. I am a safe adult. I've actually used that language, like, I just want you to know. And I'm sure inside they're like, but if I said it once, and a kid remembered if they were having a bad minute, I'd be so glad I said it to them. And I think that if we start using that language, and what that means is, if ever you need a place to go or you want to talk. And she does say too very well that, like, you know, there's something about being not a kid's parent.
There's a big deal.
It's a huge deal, right? Because that can be so tricky for teens to navigate. And so if we make it safe for kids to come to us, even if they're not our own children, and to talk about something, what an awesome safety net that creates for us, right? And it's so simple to look at a kid and say, I just want you to know, roll your eyes if you will, but I want you to know if you ever need me. I'm a safe adult and you can call me anytime, any day, any night, and I will show up for you. I think that's just huge. And so that message for me, I was just like, I love that so much, and I hope we can do more of that.
For sure. And Rob goes into talking a little bit more even about the unique opportunities that come up for connections, the unique opportunities that, you know, that teacher of his daughter's that spoke to his experience of losing a child and what an impact that had for Gabby.
Huge. And she came home and talked about it was the first day of school. And so again, it was a visceral experience for her, right? She's sitting in this classroom, this teacher's incredibly vulnerable, and again, sharing a story, right? So there's this huge moment in this very small, it doesn't look like, like you said, like curriculum. It doesn't look like it was his teacher sharing his story openly. And so trying to navigate, how can we accumulate these stories and find ways to share them that normalizes that this is everywhere. And
I just love that. I love that almost every, I can't even recall, but I think almost every one of our videos you will see an aspect of this where it's like unique, creative opportunities to connect with other people. So their resource stops here and they can, you know, use your resource so that they don't feel like they're done. It's such an important piece over and over and over. It doesn't, you know, there's going to be great things that we'll recommend about education. There'll be great things that we'll recommend about what you could do in your community. And just be somebody that's always available.
Yep, exactly.
You know, just be somebody that's always connecting and always talking. Can we be doing this? Can we be using one another to, you know, just be the resource when it's needed instead of trying to predict when it's needed or try to prevent it being needed. Any of those things. There's just no way. It's such an individual thing. There's just no way that all of the resource in the world would be able to prevent it without connection.
And so we need that. We need the village to make it all come together. So we love those points, and what we're going to do is Rob had some other beautiful points he's going to make here, so we're going to kind of come back in a minute, but we're going to let him kind of finish out some thoughts, and then we'll be back and talk about that.
Have more openness and empathy across, and people be willing to be a little bit more vulnerable, especially teachers and others. And it seems to be a theme that I think, even with Keith's experience, I mean, you're the epitome of the person who is empathetic. We need more, and not to say that will solve all of it, but at least those seem to be like things that seem like it would activate and help. It's human-centered design for staff. I think they created and human-centered design is a methodology to help people work differently based on their customer. Customers is not the right, but how to work a little differently to leverage it. And it might be the thing, and it has nothing to do with this particular topic, but it has to do with how do you relate to your students, your families, the people that are in the district in a more human way and be more empathetic. So it might be a coincidence in how they dealt with something versus how Anoka Hennepin. The other thing, though, is I wonder about, because we can't, obviously, the access to professionals, but we also, how do we give the teachers and the people in the day-to-day the tools to not necessarily be the counselors,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
to understand that empathy piece, to be able to connect. And I don't know what their training is and what that is. And because imagine having every single, have some tools or certification or others, which I'm sure they probably do, but probably less than I would imagine.
Yeah.
Of the kind of certification that teachers and people in the school, not even just teachers, it's the admin and other people that are in the school.
Mhm.
The point is that you see some people are very open about issues they're dealing with, and they do it in a 15-second clip.
Right.
So how do you build on that and
Right.
find the people who have access to those people and get them to make it more transparent? Get beyond what your perceived constraints are. I think embrace technology, embrace the attitude of how might we instead of why can't we. It's not okay in this day and age to not have multiple ways into students and others. You just don't have an assembly at the school and say you did your job. There's more to this that can be accomplished without it having to cost a lot, without it having to I just think it's more of that attitude of it doesn't have to look the same across the board. How might we be able to leverage and do things that are more personalized, are more customized, are meeting the kids where they're at, not what's the lowest common denominator all the time. So it's a challenge. I think all schools have to deal with it. Maybe our the size of the district limits it, but that's just a constraint that we put on ourselves. So can we think through that and be open to addressing it in different ways?
So that was a really good segment, and we really felt like we had to just give Rob the
floor.
stage, the floor,
exactly,
and let him kind of go through some of those. He had little snippets of things here and there that were really quite beautiful and eloquent.
Absolutely.
Well stated. So I wanted to talk to, he just brings up, we need more Keiths.
Yeah, we do.
We need more of these adults that are willing to be vulnerable, these adults that are willing to connect as humans to other humans. Exactly. They might be teen humans, but they're still just people. Right. And I think it's just a beautiful concept. And Rob even spinned off on, it could be really helpful to use that in how you teach your school staff and how you do CEU training or continuing ed training for your teachers and your staff, because that human-centered design concept, I'm familiar with it, and he's right. It speaks just to that. It's like the person across from you is a person, not a deliverable, not a goal, but it's an actual person. And I do think that if you watch the adult video when they had trouble as teens, that's what they said.
Absolutely,
that was their connection with Keith, and so I just find that to be really an important piece.
Me too. I love that point. And I think, one of the things that deeply resonated for me was when Rob is talking about how might we. He said it, and I think I may have joked in the video that I wanted to make a t-shirt.
Yes, you do.
Because I love, he says, get outside of your perceived constraints. And I think that for me, and I'm guessing for you too, that is the creativity that I mentioned throughout this entire series is exactly where he's going, which is, our constraints are the only things that are in our minds, that we are able to, as a team, as a group, as a community, as a school, come together and develop ways to address things that are so much more personal.
Right.
And they're meeting the needs of the community that you're talking to or speaking to. And so for me, I just think that's so genius, that how can we use community members as volunteers? How can we come together as a community to share our stories? How do we continue to deliver these messages as a whole collective, right? Not looking at one group or one population, but how can we really come together? and getting beyond our ideas of how that's going to look. And that's
Right.
always like the money for me. I'm like,
The-
yes, that's so
that-
good.
The perceived walls that we put up that
Exactly.
really won't work. And some of the barriers that you heard earlier were things
Right.
like the size of the school
Sure.
and how do you, with a district of that size,
Right.
like have policy that would go across schools? Well,
Exactly.
if we're talking about treating humans as humans,
You almost can't.
each school
do
has
that.
its own human culture. Each school will have its
Exactly.
own human needs.
Right.
And that's really what some of these recommendations that Rob was talking about was getting at.
Exactly. Sam says every single school is different. She was in every single school in our district. I mean, like, you know, almost executively, I believe, elementary at least. She really got to see the wide variety. I think it's so crucial we pay attention to that. And so I just loved his ideas. I think that he spoke right to the heart of, I think, where we're going, which is how do we get outside the box? How do we, you know, become more creative and inventive to work together and look beyond those things to do
Right.
something better, to be better.
My biggest thing is keep an open line of communication. Don't shut your kids down. Their opinion matters. It does. Talk to them. Talk to their friends. Get to be good friends with their friends. I want them to come to me, you know. And there were on certain occasions that they would come to me, like I'm worried about, not with Sam, about Amber, you know, like I'm worried about her, you know, like oh, I had no idea. Thank you for letting me know. You know, just having an open line of communication, you know, is huge.
Don't be complacent. It's really important that we embrace differences. Embrace that kid that's quirky. Embrace that kid that's sitting in the corner by themselves. Embrace that kid who's having a temper tantrum over here. You know, it's all good.
Part I think about is you don't have to have all the answers. Seek out help yourself. Find more ways to embrace some of these issues. You can't put a blind eye to it. And I know we've all talked about that. You have to embrace different ways to solve challenges and be open. Because you can't just do it. One size does not fit all. So find ways for technology. Find ways to, if anything, this COVID-19 has brought us is the flexibility that we can do a lot with a little, and be open to those types of things and the different ways of, and also bring in others within the community to help solve for some of these issues, because they're not going to go away. And I think the other thing in the community is if you have a story to tell, be open to tell it. Not just the teachers and the counselors and the others. I mean, no matter what, I mean, I have a very different story than a lot of others, but anything can can help. So
Right.
Absolutely.
be volunteering, be able to tell that story.
So they had some really great things to share there,
Absolutely.
and a heartfelt group. So they really meant what they were saying.
Yeah, they did.
For me, one of the things that I loved the most was Sam saying, "Don't be complacent."
Absolutely.
You know, and I think that's such good advice to give to parents. Don't stay in your lane. Not pay attention to what's happening with your kids. Not make those conversations. If parents don't create safe space.
Right.
For conversations like that to happen, they won't happen. You know, our kids aren't gonna break us up and ask. That's just not gonna happen.
No,
So
not likely.
right. So I think that's really a good point. That
I
we
do
need
too.
to not just kind of get into our routine, not be asking questions or staying curious about what's going on in our kids' lives, especially with all the pressures they have. Let's know how they feel about those pressures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Normalizing that at home. And then I think it's amazing how Rob says that you don't have to have all the answers. Right. And I think that's a huge thing for parents. There's so much fear. And I'm sure you've heard this too, you know, in your office. I know I heard it abundantly that I think parents kind of really struggle with ever feeling like they're doing the right thing. Right. And so I think it's true that we have this sensation somehow, this idea in our minds that like we have to have every single answer. And the truth is that we don't. We can't. We are fallible. And I think the cool thing actually for our kids is when we can show up with that.
Yeah.
It's so important to look at our kids and go, I don't know. I'm not sure what to do about that or what to say to that. But there's something about sitting in that and then knowing you've got resources. You're
Right.
not doing it alone, right? So you reach out to your friends, or you reach out to
Right.
someone in the community that's got wisdom or insight about something, or it's therapy or whatever it is. Not being afraid to reach out for that support. And I think that, again, if we have stigma, it keeps us quiet, right? It's that
For sure.
we have to break the don't talk rule, right?
Yep.
Which is Keith Howard. It's Keith Howard's favorite saying, you know. And so
Yeah.
I think that's really what we have to do is be willing to talk about those things and know that we're not going to have all the answers, and it's absolutely okay to reach out for help that way.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we talk about that enough. That's a stigma too. Like that as a parent, you're supposed to know everything.
Absolutely.
That you're not supposed to reach out. So yeah, it's just kind of layered on top of each other
It
that
is,
way.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so next up, we're going to be hearing their messages to teens.
I would echo what Gabby said to you guys last week, that it's okay to not be okay.
My biggest thing is I just want them to know how final this is, you know, like how this affects everyone. How this will forever impact my life, Sam's dad's life, his sister's life, you know, his friends, his family. Whatever you're going through is just a bump in the road. And I always said it to Sam, like, this is just a bump. We're gonna get through it. Talk to me. This is just a bump, you know. Please seek help. If, you know, be open about it. Don't be quiet about it. Get help. Anyone is out there willing to help you. Your life is so worth it. I always, you know, talk to Sam about the future, about getting married, having kids, what he wanted to do for work. Just the thought of not seeing him grow up. Not seeing him graduate next year. Just daily struggle. And I just want these kids to know the famous phrase that my friend at Blaine High School, she's a choir teacher, and she's my daughter's very favorite teacher, and she's a friend of mine, and her famous phrase that she would say to the kids every day is, you are loved, you're enough. You're enough, and you're not alone. And I wish these kids could see that. That they are so loved and so needed in this world.
My biggest thing, I'm going to go to what I've seen in my life from not that I've seen everything in the world, but there's something there for you. There's so much opportunity to find your niche that my daughter always goes, "Theater are my people." She says that a lot. Your people are out there. It may take a challenge. It may take, they might be your family. They might be, nobody's connected, but they're out there. And always try to recognize that some people, it takes a little bit longer to find their people, to find their niche, but it's there. And have that hope and that focus, and also go a little deeper to see if you can uncover it, because you never know where you could find that niche. So that's kind of what I've learned through my years and the people I've dealt with. And
I think that their statements really stand alone.
They do.
And I really appreciated this group. I think that they had unique perspectives that even you and I hadn't thought of. Some of the things that they came up with, the resources and suggestions that they came at. So I really appreciated having them, and I think it'll change kind of the tenor of our toolbox in some ways too.
Right.
Mhm.
Exactly.
So thank you for
Yes,
joining
thank you.
us for this video, and we're just going to end it with some words from Janet.
I feel like one's too many. If I can, help one kid,